Thank you for joining us on the DICF podcast, where we share our partners with you. Today, we have with us the Georgia Family Connection Partnership, the regional manager for the DeKalb County area, Miss Marcelle Johnson. Thank you so much for being with us
Oh,
today.
thank you for having me.
Uh,
It's a pleasure.
It's definitely a pleasure to meet you. I love your outfit. I'm going to try to
Thank
get me
you.
something going on like that.
Thank you.
So, since we have you here, and I know we have plenty to talk about in a little bit of time, I'm going to dive right on in to
Sure.
get to learn a little bit more about the organization.
Okay.
So, to kick us off, what is the origin story for Georgia Family Connection and why did it come to be?
Okay. So the origin goes back, um, now 30 plus years. So in 1991, then Governor Zell Miller looked at what was then and still exists today, the kids count data. And that data provided information on the well being of children and families in all 50 states. And so, in looking at Georgia's information, and it looked in areas of like health and education and family stability and security. Um, Georgia was ranked around 48th then, so not doing very well. And so the governor, in concert with his executive branch, like the Department of Health and Education and Children and Family Services, Juvenile Justice, so all of those agencies that dealt with children and families, he kind of brought the heads, the commissioners together and said, we can do better for Georgia's children and families. And so, thus, the birth of Georgia Family Connection. And the idea there was that people who lived in communities, who worked there, raised their children there, a lot of them came from those counties for generations, that really those local members of the communities could best decide how to address challenges and issues facing their own community. So, thus the birth. And with the birth, there were foundational principles. And so, some of those principles geared around local decision making. It geared around using data to kind of drive the decisions that were made. There was this whole focus on accountability. So, looking at results, looking at what kind of strategies we were implementing and what was happening as a result of those strategies. And in looking at really using that data to drive the decisions for the future. And one of the core principles was that families were to be involved. Like you didn't just do things to people, but did things with family members because there's a lot of expertise there on what will and what may not kind of work. And so, with the birth of Family Connection, there was an idea that there would be a community collaborative in all 159 counties. And so, in DeKalb County, that community collaborative is DICF, the DeKalb Initiative for Children and Families. And so there's this network today of these community collaboratives all looking at how do we do better for children and families. And they're left to decide the path in which they will pursue. So I work for the organization Georgia Family Connection Partnership, which is a nonprofit just like DICF. But we're tasked um, through the money for each of the community collaboratives is appropriated by the legislature. That money then goes to the Department of Human Services, DHS. And so DHS contracts with the Georgia Family Connection Partnership to do mainly three buckets of work. So the first bucket is to provide technical assistance to these community collaboratives to, help them understand, how do you develop strategies, to help them look at, effective practices, to provide assistance around evaluation. So it's that whole bucket of work around technical assistance. The next bucket of work is around data and evaluation. So we are the Kids Count grantee in the state of Georgia. So we have 51 indicators that tell us how children and families are doing in each of the 159 counties. And we also have a core team of evaluators that assist those community collaboratives in kind of building their own capacity to evaluate their work. And then the last bucket of work is around how do we communicate these results? How do we connect our community collaboratives to the best communication practices for sharing data? And how do we also kind of connect those community collaboratives to regional and state level partners and even national partners, depending on the work that's kind of happening? And so there's this conduit of information from the county level to the state level agencies that may be providing grants or may be looking at what's happening on a real time basis in these communities. We saw a lot of that during the pandemic when everything was closed down, but you had these community collaboratives where people were coming, for information about the resources they need. And so there's this whole sharing of information, not from a top level down, but from really a bottom level kind of up. And so that's the birth of Family Connection. And we've been doing it for 35 plus years now.
You just educated me at an immense level. And I think that it opens up an additional question for me. And that is of all that you've done, especially around the kids count data and truly understanding how that helps. So, what are you doing or how are you serving the community in a way that we don't understand it exists? What problem are you addressing that most people don't even realize is a problem?
Yeah. And so let me say that those problems that are being addressed by communities, they're different in each community, right? And so I can specifically say that DICF is looking at high school completion, but not just whether the kids are graduating when they at the 12th grade year are they going to graduate, but really looking at holistically what's going on with families in the communities that may pose to be some barriers to those children graduating. And so I would say that we typically may think of these issues maybe in a silo, say high school completion, but it's complex. It's way more complex than that. And so we could go back as far as whether the kids who are coming into middle school were reading on a third grade level, proficiently. And then once they get to middle school, are they then being able to do math, on their level? And then when they get to high school, what other issues are they dealing with that all of this will impact graduating from high school on time? And so a lot of times communities may and honestly we get it. We understand that you know the school is there to educate, but there are a whole bunch of other partners that also have resources and supports that will go into a child in DeKalb County graduating on time. And so it's not we can't just leave the school out there to deal with the problems alone. We have to deal with these issues as a community of partners who are all committed to our children being healthy, ready for school, succeeding when they get to school, that they live in families that are stable and economically sufficient, and that our communities are thriving. And so at the heart of all of the work that the Family Connection collaboratives do, they're all about that in the community for kids.
I like that. And you mentioned some core things here. So we talked about the kids count numbers. We talked about looking at the data and how it trickles into high school completion from where we are in middle school, where we stand. And then also the big thing that stood out to me was when this first started, how Georgia was number 48 when we talked about all these things about how poor we're doing. Where do you see measurable growth since the organization has been implemented in the state? And do we see like measurable impact year over year? What does that look like for Georgia Family Connection?
So, a lot of times changes it can be slow, right? But the good news is that in the latest kids count release, Georgia was 38. So we're no longer in the 40s, right? And again, I say that we, as these community collaboratives, can't take all of the credit for that. But we just know from all of the research around collective impact that if communities are getting together and focusing on specific issues, we do see improvements in those kinds of issues. And so I think that this whole collaborative process over the span of these many years has benefited communities in that I think our communities are used to working together to address issues that we do see less of the silo kind of thinking and even funding that we saw way back in those early years. And so we think that collectively we have seen and benefited from the work of all the partners addressing our issues.
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you so much for that update. And I think that you might say that's slow, but we think about the millions of children that are in school. It, that is significant growth, in my opinion. That shows that there are efforts because you have activated the community, if nothing else. So
I thank you because I totally agree with that. And so we know that a lot of the issues we're addressing really, again, it's multi generational. So we've seen improvements too in how our families are doing as well as our kids. The greatest challenges we continue to face um, are really around a lot of times we may have resources. So there's always the issue of getting the resources to the right people when they exactly may need those resources. I think that the challenges are, again, that the issues are complex. That, a lot of times you're not just addressing one particular issue, it's multiple issues that you may have to address. Sometimes I think the challenges are, a need for a change in mindset, right? We know our families are hardworking families, right? And so a lot of times that may not always be evident to everyone, that's kind of looking at these issues. And so I just think that a lot of what we're dealing with is the ability of different people who are dealing with families in different settings or in different ways based on what the missions of their organization or agencies are, really needing to talk to each other, right? To get different perspectives about kind of what's kind of going on. And then I think that once we do that, once we are willing to come to the table and come there with an open mind, then we can look at it through the issue from a different lens and may have a better idea of how best to address it.
I like that a lot. And I think about that consideration and hope for the future. So where do you see Georgia Family Connection Partnership in the next 3, 5, 10 years? Like what is optimal in that time frame?
So hopefully in 3, 5, 10 years, our work is really all about building the capacities of communities to do the work themselves, right? So we want to continue to build the capacity of communities to use data to drive their decision making, right? So and we have seen that. We have seen communities get away from doing things because they've always done it that way, but really look at what data suggests may be helpful, right? I think that one of the beauties of our organization and our community collaboratives is the willingness to continue to learn, right? Because I can think back that, when I first started with Family Connection, really the way we were doing things really was kind of producing a kids count book and all of those, but now all of that is web based, and so we all have to continue to learn and grow and build our capacity, right? And Georgia, the beauty of Georgia is that it is so vast and so different, right? I work with the 10 largest counties, the metro counties, but I've also worked in rural counties too. And a lot of times people may think, okay, well, that's just a metro issue or that's just a rural or suburban, but it's not. We see that we all have similar kinds of issues. And honestly, if we approach things where we're more alike than we are different, I think we'll start seeing those changes. But in 3, 5, 10 years, we want to build the capacity of these communities to do it as themselves. And so what that might mean is I would no longer have a job, but that's okay because communities would be able to know that this is really how we impact the changes that we want to see in our community.
I love that. You mentioned something about how you had a kids count book and now everything is web based. Look at the evolution of time and technology. So, where do you see technology and the future of Georgia Family Connection Partnership?
I see, sometimes I guess technology can be scary, but there are so many benefits of it, right? So, one of the things that we've seen, and, we saw it being used quite a lot during the pandemic, is the fact that we can do things virtually that we used to have to travel to all of these counties and community collaboratives to do. So there's that ability to share learnings and information in a much more efficient and effective way that we didn't have when we first began this. And so we have that opportunity to kind of gather our community collaboratives to work together, not just based on geography, but based on a similarity in the issues that they are working on or in the way or manner in which they want to address those kind of issues. And so, and we also see the ability to not only help build the capacity of the family connection organization, say the DICF, but the partners as well who are out here kind of doing this work. And so we believe that with our community collaboratives, if we're helping to build the capacity of other nonprofits and agencies and organizations, then all of the kids and the families will benefit from that. And so it's kind of almost like you start something growing and it kind of expands in terms of the understanding and the growth and the ability to use those learnings to benefit the community.
I like that. I like that a lot. So let's pretend. I like to fantasize.
Okay.
You have unlimited funding.
Mm,
What would Georgia Family Connection Partnership do if they had unlimited resources to serve?
hmm. I think that one of the things that we would do is that we would ensure that each of these community collaboratives has the infrastructure in place to do all of the work that they want to do in the community, right? So the beauty is that the Georgia legislature each year appropriates money so that each of these community collaboratives will have a coordinator in place that's helping to guide and lead the work, right? But we talked about it before. The work is complex, and in our larger counties, there are a lot of other nonprofits and partners. So it will take more than just one person, right, doing that work. So if we had unlimited money, I think the first thing we do is ensure that these collaborative type organizations are able to sustain themselves, right? And then you're not worrying about how are we going to continue to make sure that we have a person in place and that person has benefits and that they have all of the supports and tools that they need, computers and IT technology and all of those things, because that would be taken care of. And then they could just focus on the bigger, larger picture of these are our issues here, and these are the partners we want to bring to the table to address it. And I'm just not a one person shop. I have all of those people I need to kind of lead those strategy teams that are doing the work all around the community.
So that was very detailed and very specific.
Mhm.
Is that what you're hearing from your collaborators today? That's what they need the most?
Yes, it really is, because they'll say, I'm only one person. Now, some of them are may have more people that are working doing the work, but many of them are having to figure that out. And if you know anything about nonprofits or organizations that are similar, the that capacity building money, that's the hardest money to kind of find, right? So most of the time, when people hear that nonprofits can get grants, those grants are normally for a specific program, right? But if you talk about, well, we're in the business of ensuring that people work together in a community, that's much harder funding to find out there, right? That capacity building. But again, we talked about it earlier. These issues are complex. And so you may not be dealing with a specific program per se, but how are you bringing all the people who have all of these various programs together to talk, to make sure that there's no overlap in like who they're serving, right? So if you have 10 after school programs, right, in the community, you want to make sure that as many kids as possible are, having access to that program, right? And so you don't want five of them to just be in South DeKalb and there are none in North DeKalb, or vice versa, right? So it takes work to, first find out who all is doing the work in DeKalb County, and then how do you bring those partners together in kind of an organized fashion so that they don't think they're just meeting to meet, but really can see the fruits of the labor of working together.
No, that makes total sense. Thank you so much for sharing that for sure. So I know we're kind of coming up on time, but I'm enjoying learning. And I know that you probably have so much more you would like to share as well.
I realized that, this is again, I talked about us being a learning organization, but learning doesn't always happen in only one setting or one time that we're together,
So
right?
I enjoy you just told me that you're willing to come back and sit in the
Uh,
seat.
def- definitely, definitely,
So
because this work and this is the beauty of it. I don't care where I go around Georgia in terms of these community collaboratives. There's a passion there for the work that, I mean, you just kind of almost want to bottle it, and sell it and make a whole lot of money. But there's a passion for it because there's an investment in the kids and the community.
absolutely. So I'm going to ask you guys, I'm taking liberty. I'm going to ask you three more questions. One, what is the biggest need that your organization has today that's outside of funding? We know that funding is the key and the core, especially
Hmm.
when we think about data driven services.
Hmm.
What is one thing that someone can do to help today?
I think that the most important thing that partners could do is to get involved, honestly, to come to the table, because we believe that resources are people, places, and things. I mean, money is the thing, but if you don't have the people part of that, a lot of times the money is not going to do you any good, right? Because we also believe the knowledge is in the room. So if the people are there and they're talking, then it's amazing. Like light bulbs are going off all over the place. And so there the pot of funding may be finite, but the information and energy and knowledge is not, it's infinite, right? And so I think that the most important thing is for people to get involved and to start talking to each other about what they're doing, what they need, because a lot of times we may have not because we ask not. People may not know that that's a need of ours, right? And I would also say that one of the most important things that these organizations can do, have a great board of directors and, to be out there learning and growing because a lot of the information is free, right? That you can get these days, right? So you don't have to wait for somebody to do a training. You can get online and kind of get the knowledge and information yourself. But I would say the first step is to become involved with organizations like DICF, who's looking to, really does not, have a dog in the fight in terms of being someone who's competing for funding, but really trying to figure out how we can get the biggest bang for our buck in DeKalb County.
No, thank you so much for that.
Mhm.
I appreciate it. So we are now going to put up the card. So it's going to have the best way for you to find out, learn more about Georgia Family Connection Partnership. Their
Mhm.
website and all the stuff is probably on the screen right now or coming soon. So just make sure you take down and jot that down and learn how you can best get involved. And then before you leave, Ms. Johnson, if you could look directly in that camera
Mhm.
and let us know what legacy would Georgia Family Connection Partnership want to leave behind?
The legacy that Georgia Family Connection Partnership would want to leave behind is the legacy of people working together in a collaborative manner where communities are driving the decisions that they're making to improve outcomes for children and families.
Mic drop. Absolutely. Thank you for this overview. I hope people feel encouraged and understand that there's someone out here working for you in a manner that you didn't even realize was important and critical for our youth. Thank you. Thank you. Until next time.